The winter ball at Ravensshire Manor glittered as though every candle, every chandelier, every polished marble surface conspired to turn the evening into a portrait of splendor, yet Lady Evelyn Harrow felt none of its warmth. She stood at the edge of the ballroom, spine straight, eyes lowered, as if posture alone could shield her from the murmurs curling through the air like poisonous smoke. Her gown, pale ivory silk, had been chosen to project dignity, but in the unforgiving court of London society, dignity was as fragile as breath. Ever since her separation, her very presence summoned whispers. "Poor Lady Harrow," someone murmured behind a lace fan. "Abandoned." Another voice, sharper. "Or perhaps she deserves it." Evelyn forced herself not to flinch. She had mastered the art of pretending she did not hear cruelty disguised as curiosity, yet tonight each word landed like a blow. She raised her gaze toward the musicians, pretending an interest she did not feel, when a sudden hush rippled through the room. She knew that silence. It meant he had arrived. Lord Alastair Harrow, her ex-husband, a man of impeccable grooming, striking charm, and a heart hollowed by cruelty, stepped through the main archway, snow on his shoulders, smile polished to hide the rot beneath. He had no right to attend, yet he always returned when she least expected him, as though her suffering were an appointment he could not miss. His eyes found her instantly. The smile sharpened. Her breath stilled. She turned away, hoping he would be intercepted by acquaintances, but Alastair navigated the room with the confidence of a man certain he owned everything he touched, including her. "Evelyn," he murmured when he reached her, the syllables silk-wrapped steel. "Did you miss me?" She stepped back, pulse hammering. "You should not be here." "On the contrary," he said, leaning in, "I find I go wherever my wife goes." "Ex-wife," she corrected softly, though the words scraped her throat. He chuckled. "Such legal fiction amuses me." His fingers brushed her wrist, a touch that sent cold panic through her bones. She pulled away, but he caught her elbow, smiling for the benefit of onlookers. "You belong with me," he whispered. "You always will." The musician's violins swelled, but Evelyn heard nothing beyond the roaring fear in her ears. She wrenched her arm free and, before he could mask his anger, hurried into the nearest corridor. The sudden quiet of the passage felt like a gasp of air, but she knew he would follow. He always followed. Her footsteps quickened across the carpeted hallway. Servants bustled in distant corners, oblivious to her trembling. The manor, with its tall doors and gilded sconces, became a maze she navigated purely by instinct. She needed somewhere secluded, somewhere she could hide until her heartbeat steadied. Candle flames wavered as she passed, shadows elongating like fingers trying to catch her. She reached a side staircase and climbed it in a rush of silk and terror, her breath fogging in the faint chill of the upper floor. Behind her, footsteps echoed, slow, deliberate, unmistakable. She reached the top landing and darted down another hallway, praying for an unlocked room. The first door she tried was bolted, the second opened slightly but voices murmured inside. Panic prickled her spine. She tried a third door, pressed the latch, and the door gave way. She slipped inside, closing it behind her as silently as she could. The room was dim, illuminated only by the low glow of a fire burning in the hearth. For a moment she allowed herself to breathe, until she sensed she was not alone. A tall figure stood near the window, his silhouette framed by the amber firelight. When he turned, Evelyn recognized him instantly. Adrian Blackwell, the Duke of Ashbourne, a man whispered about with reverence and wariness in equal measure. He was adjusting the cuff of his shirt, the top button of his waistcoat undone, as though he had sought a moment of privacy from the oppressive festivities below. His dark gaze met hers with quiet astonishment. "My lady," he said. His voice was deep, steady, threaded with a calm that felt dangerously close to safety. Evelyn lifted a trembling hand. "Forgive me, I did not know. I thought this room was empty." Her breath fractured, and for the first time she truly saw him. The black hair brushed back with deliberate precision, the jawline sculpted in severity, the eyes that missed nothing. A man like him inspired both admiration and caution, yet in his gaze she detected neither judgment nor amusement, only concern. Before she could speak again, heavy footsteps approached outside the door. She froze. The Duke's expression shifted, understanding slicing through the dim stillness like a blade. He stepped toward her, not threateningly, but with a quiet, decisive authority. "Someone follows you," he murmured. She nodded, unable to form words. The footsteps halted just beyond the door. A shadow darkened the crack beneath it. The Duke inhaled once, a slow, controlled breath. Then, in a voice low enough to feel rather than hear, he said, "If you wish to remain unseen, my lady, you must allow me to hide you." Evelyn's heart thudded. Outside, the doorknob twitched. Inside, the Duke extended a hand toward her, steady and unhesitating, as the door began, very slowly, to turn. She did not hesitate when the Duke's hand closed around hers, guiding her into the shadowed alcove behind the heavy velvet drapery just as the door creaked open. Her breath caught, and the thick folds concealed her as Lord Alistair stepped inside with the cold impatience of a man who believed the world owed him obedience. Only the faint line of light at the bottom of the curtain connected her to the room, revealing the Duke's polished boots a mere pace away. Alistair's shoes clicked sharply across the floor. "I know you are here, Evelyn," he said, his voice smooth as lacquer, its calm more frightening than rage. She pressed a hand to her lips, praying the trembling would not give her away. The Duke moved with subtle precision, stepping between the curtain and the rest of the room, an elegant barrier forged not from violence but sheer authority. "You seek someone?" he asked, every syllable meticulously controlled. Alistair gave a thin smile, though tension crackled beneath it. "My wife," he replied, emphasizing the word with a deliberate cruelty that made Evelyn's stomach twist. "And if she has come this way, I shall find her." The Duke's reply was soft, so soft she nearly doubted she heard it. "You will not search my chamber." A long silence followed, heavy as snowfall. Evelyn's heart pounded. She could feel the heat of the Duke's presence through the curtain, a protective force she did not understand but clung to nonetheless. Alistair exhaled sharply, frustration slicing the air. "This is not finished," he muttered, and after a moment, his boots retreated toward the door. The latch clicked. Silence settled. Evelyn remained frozen until the Duke gently drew back the curtain, his expression unreadable but softened at the edges. "You may breathe now," he said, and though his tone was neutral, something in his eyes suggested a restrained warmth. Her knees weakened, not from fear alone but from the overwhelming relief of having, for the first time in months, been defended. "Thank you," she said, breath unsteady. He stepped aside, allowing her room to compose herself, but he did not look away. In the glow of the fire, he seemed carved from steadiness itself, nothing like the fickle men who filled ballrooms with empty charm. "You are trembling," he observed. "I will recover," she managed, though her voice shook again when a gust of wind rattled the windowpane. The Duke retrieved a silver-embroidered handkerchief from the small table, its crest glinting faintly. He offered it without flourish, as though the gesture held no expectation, only consideration. "Keep it," he said when she attempted to refuse. "If danger finds you again, return it to me and I shall know you require assistance." Evelyn stared at the token, her fingers brushing the embroidered crest with hesitant reverence. No one had offered her protection in so long that the kindness struck deeper than intended. She tucked the handkerchief into the small pocket sewn at her waist, unaware of how much weight the gesture carried. When he escorted her to the corridor, the world felt strangely altered, still perilous, still sharp with whispers, but softened by the knowledge that at least one person had seen her fear and had not turned away. Downstairs, the ballroom swirled with rumors. Evelyn felt their eyes like pricking needles as she passed, but she held her head higher than before. Some guests whispered that she had been in the Duke's private wing, others claimed they had seen her slip away with him. Gossip frothed quickly, effervescent and impossible to contain. By the time she reached the cloakroom, the rumor had fully blossomed into scandal. Young ladies exchanged looks of envy, older matrons frowned with disapproval sharp enough to wound. Evelyn forced herself not to shrink. She retrieved her cloak, stepped into the winter night, and felt the cold instantly bite her cheeks, but the air outside was easier to breathe. Her carriage rattled along the cobblestones toward home, frost forming on the window as shadows of gas lamps stretched past. Only when she reached her room did she reach into her pocket for the handkerchief, only to find it gone. In its place lay a small folded note, as thin and sharp as a blade. Her stomach tightened as she opened it. 3 words stared up at her, written in a hand she knew too well. You belong to me. Her pulse skittered wildly, and for a moment she could only stand there, the paper trembling between her fingers like a living accusation. The room seemed to shrink around her, shadows bending inward as though the walls themselves recognized the threat creeping back into her life. She clutched the note until it crumpled, wishing she could crush the man who wrote it as easily. But the echo of the Duke's steady voice surfaced in her mind, a quiet anchor against the storm rising inside her. He had stood between her and danger without hesitation, and the memory of his calm strength steadied her more than she expected. She unfolded the note again, this time not with fear but with a simmering resolve. If Alistair believed she would break easily, he had forgotten the woman he once tried to tame. Yet even as she straightened, a cold truth pressed against her ribs. He had taken the handkerchief. That token, the Duke's promise of protection, was now in the possession of the man who meant her harm. A chill deeper than winter air swept through her. If the Duke saw it, he would know she needed him. If Alistair held it, he would twist its meaning into a weapon. Evelyn's throat tightened as she realized what this quietly declared. Alistair was not merely pursuing her, he intended to reclaim her by force of intimidation and rumor. He had already stolen the Duke's token. It would not stop there. As the last embers in her fireplace dimmed, she stared at the curtained window, a strange mixture of fear and determination stirring within. The grey light of dawn had barely broken through the London fog when Evelyn stepped into her carriage, fingers clenched around the crumpled note that had robbed her of sleep. All night she had stared at it, the ink seeming to darken with every hour, until the message had grown monstrous in her mind. By morning, the fear had hardened into something sharper, resolve, thin but real, and she found herself uttering the Duke's address to the coachman before she had fully decided to go. The carriage wheels rumbled across frost-bitten streets, each turn reminding her that what she was doing bordered on reckless, yet she could not quiet the memory of the silver handkerchief, stolen from her pocket as easily as a breath. She needed counsel or reassurance, or simply the steadiness of a voice that had not spoken to her with cruelty. Ashbourne Manor loomed through the mist like a fortress carved from shadow and stone, stately and aloof, as though it belonged to another world entirely, a world in which no man would dare threaten her. She stepped out, her chilled fingers trembling just enough for her to tuck them beneath her cloak before the footman approached. "His Grace is in the library," the servant said with a polite bow, though his eyes flicked briefly to her pale face, perhaps noting the strain she failed to hide. The corridor smelled faintly of cedar and old parchment, and Evelyn's step softened instinctively as she approached the tall double doors. She paused, her hand hovering, uncertain whether she had overstepped by coming unannounced. But then she heard movement inside, the soft scrape of a chair, the rustling of paper, and before doubt could pull her back, she knocked. "Enter," came his voice, deep and resonant even through the heavy wood. She stepped in, and the Duke rose at once from behind his desk, the firelight catching the stark lines of his face. "Lady Harrow," he said, and though he did not sound surprised, he did look unsettled, as if sensing something amiss. She curtsied, though her legs wavered slightly. "Forgive me for arriving without notice." "Forgiveness is unnecessary," he replied, moving closer, his gaze sharpening as it took in her pallor. "I see you did not sleep." The simple observation unraveled her composure more swiftly than any accusation would have. She reached into her pocket, withdrawing the note, now smoothed, though still bearing the creases of her restless night, and handed it to him with a hand she wished did not tremble. He read the 3 words without blinking, but the muscle in his jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "He left this in your home?" She nodded. "And he has the handkerchief. I believe he took it from me before I returned." The Duke's expression darkened, but it was not anger she feared. It was the quiet, controlled fury of a man who rarely allowed emotion to breach the surface. He folded the note and placed it on the mantel, as though even the fireplace should not consume something so vile. "You did well to come," he said. She managed a breath that shook like a torn ribbon. "I did not know where else to go." His gaze softened, the severity easing just enough for warmth to emerge. "This house shall never be closed to you." Evelyn lowered her eyes, fighting the sting rising behind them. "I do not wish to be a burden." "You are not," he said firmly, and she felt the words settle over her like a cloak lined with reassurance. He gestured to a leather chair near the fire, and she sank into it, hands clasped tightly in her lap. The flames cast shifting gold across the library walls, filling the silence that stretched between them until it felt intimate rather than uncomfortable. At last, he spoke. "Tell me everything." And she did, though not in the torrent she feared, but slowly, carefully, as though each memory were a fragile artifact she placed gently between them. She spoke of her marriage, a union forged through obligation rather than affection, of Alistair's charm decaying into indifference, then cruelty. She confessed how he had isolated her, how he had turned society's disapproval into a whip, how every step she took after the separation felt as though she walked on glass. Her voice faltered only once, when she whispered, "I thought divorce would free me, but it has only made me easier to hunt." The Duke's hands, resting on the back of the chair opposite her, curled into fists before he steadied himself. "A man who mistakes possession for affection is no man at all," he said, each word carved with quiet conviction. She lifted her gaze to him, and for the first time, the air between them shifted, no longer merely protector and protected, but two souls revealing the wounds hidden beneath their carefully tended manners. She dared to ask, "Have you ever felt as though the world demanded a version of you that was not truly yours?" His eyes met hers, and something unguarded flickered there. "Every day since I inherited my title," he murmured. "Strength, perfection, restraint, they are the armor society demands. But armor grows heavy when worn without pause." His candor startled her, and yet it drew her forward, as though the space between them had become a bridge instead of a boundary. "I envy your composure," she admitted. "You seem untouched by fear." "I am not untouched," he said quietly, "only practiced at concealing it." A silence followed, rich as velvet, warm as the fire that softened the sharp lines of his silhouette. In it, Evelyn felt something she had not in years, the safety to be vulnerable without punishment. She exhaled slowly, and her voice gentled. "Thank you for listening, for believing me." His gaze held hers, steady, unwavering. "I do more than believe you, Lady Harrow. I stand with you." Before she could reply, the library door burst open. A breathless footman stumbled inside, eyes wide, face drained of color. "Your Grace," he gasped, "Lord Harrow is here, demanding entry. And he is not alone." The Duke's expression hardened, the softness replaced by command. He stepped toward the door, but before he reached it, he turned back to Evelyn, his voice low, fierce, and certain. "You will not face him without me." The streets of London were cloaked in a muted drizzle as Evelyn descended from the carriage in front of the magistrate's hall, the cobblestones slick beneath her boots. Her heart hammering not from exertion, but from the knowledge that she was about to face the man who had haunted her nights and threatened her very dignity. Yet at her side walked the Duke of Ashbourne, tall and imposing. His presence a shield she had come to rely upon more than she had imagined possible. His dark coat brushing hers as though the world could be held at bay simply by proximity. Together, they entered the hall where sunlight slanted through tall windows, striking polished wood and the serious faces of London's arbiters of law, and the air seemed suddenly thick with expectation, whispers fluttering like trapped birds around them as Alistair Harrow stood near the judge's bench, all charm gone and replaced with a venomous confidence that only heightened Evelyn's tension. And yet, she did not falter, for the Duke's steady hand rested lightly on the small of her back, a grounding force against the tidal wave of scrutiny, and when the magistrate called for order, the room's noise dissolved into silence, the very walls seeming to lean closer, curious about the confrontation to come. Alistair's eyes found hers, sharp and accusing, and he moved toward her as if to reclaim ownership, but the Duke stepped before him, a human barricade of calm authority, his voice low but carrying. "Lady Evelyn is under my protection, and any man who lays claim to her without her consent shall answer to me." A collective gasp rippled through the assembly, the gravity of such a declaration echoing louder than any gavel could, and Evelyn felt a curious mixture of fear and triumph as Alistair's smirk faltered, the sharp edge of his dominance blunted by the unyielding force of the Duke's presence. Yet he attempted one final attempt to seize control, his voice silky and dangerous. "You presume to command what is not yours, Blackwell?" The Duke's gaze did not waver. Every syllable was deliberate, every movement precise. "I presume only to defend what is hers, and any who oppose it shall be deemed my adversary," he said, and his tone carried the weight of a man who would not yield to threat or deceit, and for a moment the room held its breath, caught between admiration, shock, and the latent thrill of scandal, while Evelyn drew herself up, realizing that in this moment, her own voice, previously muted by fear and societal expectation, could finally assert itself. She stepped forward, the fire of her resolve kindling in her chest, and spoke with measured elegance, the clarity of her diction cutting through the tension. "I will speak for myself, as I have been denied voice for too long. No man, no husband, no former husband, may dictate my life, my movements, or my honor, and any attempt to do so shall fail, for I am neither fragile nor compliant." The magistrate inclined his head, murmuring acknowledgment of her courage, while the assembly shuffled, sensing the collapse of the narrative Alastair had tried so desperately to construct, and even the Duke's eyes softened briefly, pride and something gentler reflecting in their depths as he allowed her to take the forefront. Her words a clarion bell of self-possession, yet still tethered to the peril lurking beyond the hall. The echo of Alastair's entitlement, a shadow that would not entirely vanish. Then the Duke stepped closer, placing a hand lightly upon the bench beside hers, and his voice, now calm but resolute, added to hers without overshadowing. "You are under no man's dominion but your own, and I will see that no threat endangers you further." At that, murmurs cascaded across the room like silk brushing over marble, whispers of awe, of admiration, of scandal barely restrained, and Alastair, stripped of his previous dominance, flushed with anger and humiliation, his hands clenching at his sides as the magistrate's gavel finally fell, signaling that no immediate legal claim could be pressed, while a hush descended over the crowd, leaving Evelyn and the Duke in a space suspended between society's judgment and the intimacy of their shared triumph. She drew a breath, long and shuddering, as though exhaling years of fear, and glanced at the Duke, the firelight from the ornate sconces illuminating the sharp angles of his face softened by the tender gravity of the moment, and she allowed herself a fleeting smile, brief and fragile, before the door creaked, drawing attention to the arrival of several ladies from the assembly, who paused mid-step, whispers curling through the room like smoke. "Is it true? Has the Duke claimed her?" "She stands with him," another whispered, eyes wide with fascination. Evelyn felt heat rise to her cheeks, not from shame but from the realization that she was no longer merely a subject of rumor. She was an agent of her own story, a woman who had faced humiliation and emerged composed, shielded not by society's fickle admiration but by deliberate loyalty and honor. The Duke's hand lightly brushed hers as he offered a subtle nod, a gesture that acknowledged not only her courage but the bond that had quietly formed through shared peril and unspoken understanding, and she grasped it for an instant, her fingers tightening around his in silent gratitude and recognition that some things, protection, loyalty, perhaps even affection, required neither announcement nor ceremony to exist fully. Outside, the rain had softened to mist, curling around the edges of the hall's grand entrance, and as they prepared to depart, the last echoes of the crowd faded into the patter of water against cobblestones, leaving them in the liminal space between danger past and uncertainty ahead. Evelyn paused on the steps, inhaling the scent of wet stone and winter air, and for a heartbeat, she felt the fragile thrill of freedom, the rare knowledge that she had not only survived but asserted herself against the forces that had sought to bind her. And yet even as the carriage door opened to receive them, a shadow flickered at the periphery of her vision, subtle and fleeting, a reminder that Alastair's reach may extend beyond the courtroom, that his claim had not yet fully relinquished, and that while she had reclaimed her voice and dignity in public, the true measure of safety, the quiet, private reassurance that danger could no longer touch her, remained unresolved, a tension that clung to her like mist, whispering that the next challenge, whatever form it might take, would test not only courage and decorum but the fragile trust and nascent connection she had forged with the Duke, whose steady presence now felt less like a shield and more like a promise. And as the carriage rolled away, the soft clatter of wheels against wet stone seemed to echo with the unspoken question lingering between them, one that neither words nor glances had yet fully answered. What cost would the pursuit of freedom demand? And who would stand by her when the shadows inevitably returned? Snow had begun to fall softly over Ashbourne Manor, drifting in delicate swirls that coated the garden hedges and the slate roof in an almost ethereal white, and Evelyn stepped from the carriage, her gloved hands clutching the Duke's arm as if to anchor herself against the lingering tremor of fear she had carried all day. The air was crisp and sharp, carrying the scent of pine and frost, and each breath seemed to steady her courage, for she knew that tonight the final reckoning would unfold. Not before society, but within the private walls where truth and consequence could no longer be delayed. The manor loomed behind them, its tall windows glowing warmly against the night, casting pools of amber light onto the fresh snow, and the grand hall, prepared with meticulous care, held an intimacy few had ever seen, the flicker of candlelight reflected in polished brass, the heavy velvet curtains drawn to keep the cold and the world outside at bay, a sanctuary for confessions and confrontations alike. Evelyn felt her pulse accelerate as they entered, the faint rustle of her skirts on the marble floor echoing like a whispered warning. Yet when the Duke closed the door behind them, sealing the hall from the cold and from prying eyes, she allowed herself a moment to breathe, inhaling the warmth, the scent of burning oak, the faint perfume of winter roses arranged with deliberate softness, and for the first time that day, she felt the tension shift from dread to anticipation. He led her to a small settee near the fire, the flames throwing golden light across his face, highlighting the stark lines softened by concern, and she dared to meet his gaze, searching for the reassurance she needed yet fearing it might betray the gravity of what must occur. "Tonight," he said, his voice low but steady, "we face what cannot be postponed. Whatever he seeks, whatever he believes he can reclaim, will find neither foothold here nor compliance from you." She nodded, her throat tight, and her voice barely above a whisper she admitted, "I fear I have little strength left, though I know I cannot falter." The Duke extended his hand, lightly, not to command but to offer partnership, and she placed her trembling fingers in his, feeling the warmth of certainty that only his presence could give. The tension of the past weeks, the whispers, the stolen handkerchief, the threats, the public spectacle, seemed to coalesce into a sharp, expectant silence, the world narrowing to this hall, this moment, this choice. And then, as if drawn by inevitability, the door burst open, snowflakes scattering across the floor, and Alastair Harrow entered, his eyes wild, the smirk of entitlement replaced with something more feral, a desperation Evelyn had never seen before. He froze when he saw them, the Duke's posture rigid, commanding, every inch the protector, and Evelyn drew herself up, feeling a strange alchemy of fear and resolve intertwine. "You cannot keep her from me," he spat, voice sharp, cutting through the warmth of the room like glass. The Duke did not flinch. "She is under no man's dominion but her own," he said evenly, each word deliberate, measured, an unassailable declaration, and Evelyn realized that he was not merely defending her. He was asserting a truth long denied by cruel circumstance. "You presume to speak for her," Alastair hissed. Evelyn inhaled, and for the first time she lifted her voice without faltering. "No man presumes over me. Not you. Not the past. Not fear itself. I am my own, and I will answer to no other but myself." Her words, crystalline and poised, reverberated through the hall, silencing murmurs and drawing the attention of the snow-dusted trees beyond the windows, as if even the night held its breath in acknowledgment. Alastair's face contorted, a mask of fury and disbelief, and for a fleeting moment he seemed poised to strike, yet the Duke's hand on his shoulder, firm and immovable, halted him, a living barrier of authority and intent. "Step back," the Duke commanded, voice low but edged with steel, "or answer to me." The confrontation held for a suspended heartbeat. Then Alastair, realizing the futility, recoiled, his shoulders sagging as if the weight of his failures crushed him from within. Without a word, he turned, retreating into the snowy night, the echo of his boots fading into silence, leaving the hall suffused with the stillness of victory and relief. Evelyn sank into a chair by the fire, drawing in a breath so long it seemed to carry away months of anxiety, and the Duke knelt before her, lifting her hand gently to brush his lips across her knuckles, a gesture intimate yet dignified, filled with the promise of protection and the acknowledgment of her courage. "You have faced him with more strength than many could muster," he murmured, eyes dark, intense, yet soft, catching the firelight in a way that made her stomach tighten. "And yet, this night is ours to choose," she whispered, the tremor in her voice not from fear but from the awareness that every choice henceforth would be deliberate, not coerced, and every heartbeat a testament to autonomy reclaimed. He extended the silver handkerchief, the one that had been stolen and returned, not as a token of control but as a symbol of trust and partnership. "For you," he said quietly, "to remind you that the future belongs to those who dare to claim it, not those who demand it." Her fingers closed over it, the fabric cool against her palm, a tangible bridge between past terror and the fragile promise of hope. Outside, snow drifted silently, settling in quiet blankets that softened the harsh edges of the world, and Evelyn realized that she had survived the storm of whispers, threats, and fear, and emerged not merely intact, but empowered, her dignity intact, her voice no longer captive to the designs of others. The Duke rose, offering his arm, and she placed her hand tentatively within it, a small gesture weighted with significance, signaling alliance, trust, and the subtle bloom of a connection neither hurried nor forced, yet undeniable. For a long moment, they simply stood together, watching the snow swirl past the grand windows, the silence between them rich with unspoken understanding, shared trauma, and the tentative sparks of something deeper than protection alone. Then, as the first stars pierced the darkened sky, Evelyn felt the tension of months release from her shoulders. Yet even as she exhaled, a delicate thrill of awareness lingered. Life outside these walls remained uncertain, the world beyond still watchful, still intrusive, and though tonight she had won her freedom, the knowledge that courage must be maintained, that trust must be guarded, remained vivid, sharpening her senses rather than dulling them. And as she glanced at the Duke, whose gaze lingered on her with quiet intensity, a thought passed unspoken but palpable, that their paths, intertwined now by danger and by choice, would continue, and that whatever storms awaited, they would meet them together, hands clasped, wills aligned, hearts quietly steadfast, and in that suspended, trembling moment, Evelyn allowed herself the faintest, most fragile smile. A smile that promised resilience, hope, and the unspoken certainty that she would never again be dictated by fear, as outside the manor, the snow fell heavier, masking the night in white, and the world, though cold and vast, felt suddenly, almost impossibly, as though it might belong to her.